How can we help every student succeed?
By giving each student the opportunity to reach their potential.
That's the symbol of
That's the chemical symbol.
When I can learn in the way that's best for me.
And I can learn in the way that's best for me.
That makes education fair for everyone.
Every student deserves the opportunity to learn in their own way.
Read in their own way.
And feel in their own way.
So we can empower each learner to achieve more.
Atoms can combine to form different molecules.
By using technology, we can create safe and supportive learning environments.
Where learning is inclusive.
Where students are engaged.
And we have the insights at our fingertips to make sure that every student is set up for success.
These words were the most challenging for you. You are making your brain stronger. Nice work.
So whether the solutions help a student,
A class.
A school.
Or an entire district.
Our goal is for every student to thrive in learning and life.
By supporting each student, we can unlock opportunity for everyone.
So we can all find our own way to succeed.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bett. We are so excited to be here. It is fantastic to see people's legs again. I'm just like not in a little screen. So happy to be here. My name is Paige Johnson. I'm the Vice President of Education from Microsoft, and we have a great lineup today. We were originally scheduled to have Kate Griggs here with Made by Dyslexia, but unfortunately, she came down with COVID last week. So we have a pinch hitter in Mark today, and he'll introduce himself. Our topic is going to stay the same. Really, at this moment in time, all the challenges that we're facing and all the opportunities, I'm really interested in taking policy into practice. How do we create innovations and solutions that scale to support all kids in our system? And so today we have a policy expert and researcher with us, an international expert on educational technology, and me that gets to interview them as a recovering biology teacher, here to talk to you. And that's always my lens, is how would I do this in biology, because that was the subject that I taught. I'm really excited today to introduce Natalie Perera from EPI. She's going to talk to us a little bit about her organization and the research and policy work she's working on.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here today, and great, as Paige said, to see you all in person. I'm Natalie Perera. I'm the Chief Executive of the Education Policy Institute. I founded EPI back in 2015 after working for over a decade in government on education policy. And the reason that I founded EPI is because after that decade working in government, I felt like nothing was really shifting the dial in terms of improving educational outcomes, but particularly narrowing the gap between the most vulnerable, the most disadvantaged pupils, and the rest. So 6.5 years on, EPI conducts rigorous quantitative research looking at what is and isn't working in terms of education policy in the UK. And we have a distinct focus on closing that gap between disadvantaged pupils and the rest. We use our research to try and influence government, policymakers, school leaders, everybody in this education ecosystem to make changes for the better and to particularly improve the outcomes for disadvantaged pupils. Over the course of this panel, I'll be talking a little bit more about some of the research findings, particularly over the course of the pandemic. But for now, thank you so much for having me.
Great, thanks, Natalie. So what's now and what's next? Well, what's now is I was feeling incredibly nervous the thought of standing on this stage and speaking to you all. And then I paused and thought about my daughter. Now, she's just an early career teacher. She's just started teaching. She's barely been in front of a real class before. All of her practicum, her practice teaching, has been largely remote or an awkward blend of remote learning and hybrid and face-to-face. But right now she's a face-to-face teacher with a grade 4 class, week 7, term 1 in Australia, with a group of kids who have barely been together with other children for 2 years, with a group of students who have faced complexity and challenge over the last couple of years. I'm totally impressed. As an educator myself with 30 years experience, I'm impressed by what educators have done over the last couple of years. And anybody that says to me that our profession is traditionally slow to adapt, they need to rethink that statement right now, because educators across the globe have shown an incredible capacity to reimagine and to reinvent learning. Technology, it's changed what is possible. It's provided us with tools to allow learners to collaborate, to communicate across great distance in multiple languages, to create, to explore, and find ways to maintain continuity against a backdrop of hardship. What I'm excited about the most is to find out what is going to be durable as we enter the endemic and we move forwards. What are the changes? What are the improvements in practice which are going to be carried forward? That's what inspires me when I think about what's next. Thanks, Paige.
Thanks, Shernon. Thanks so much. It's so great to have you both here. You know, as I think about my own experience in the pandemic, I was a consultant, mostly working in the United States, and context is really important. So for example, one of the organizations I was working with was a school in the Navajo Nation serving American Indian children. Very rural, very remote, very challenged by remote working, and we spent a lot of time working with the principal and the families to make sure that the interventions and support that they were giving kids in the pandemic were culturally relevant to what their goals were as a community. Natalie, I know you've done a lot of work around context and cultural relevance. Can you talk a little bit about what the research shows and any advice that you're giving to government organizations or schools around that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Our research finds that back in 2020, when the pandemic hit, actually a quarter, roughly, of school children were in long-term poverty. That means they'd been eligible for free school meals for most of their school lives. And that really had an impact on their attainment, first and foremost. But it meant that when the pandemic hit, children in these families, in low-income households, they struggled with having food over the course of the day, where normally they'd get a free meal in school. They struggled with access to technology, not only their own laptop, but also Wi-Fi and internet connectivity that we take for granted. And then many of them were in families that were already experiencing what we might consider to be trauma or financial difficulty or crises. They didn't have the kind of resilience or framework that meant they were able to cope immediately with what the pandemic brought.
Yeah, I think those are all real challenges, and some of those challenges, technology can really help to address or support educators. Mark, I know you've spent a lot of your time in the pandemic thinking about how technology can help schools overcome some of those challenges that are systemic inequities that aren't necessarily created by education, but which we have to overcome to make sure kids are ready to learn. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of your experiences of context and support and what you saw?
Sure. And I think Natalie's picked on a really important element there around context. And I think what we're going to see are two new intelligences which will become fundamental for as we navigate forwards, particularly for leaders. Contextual intelligence, being able to understand, make sense, adapt and respond to those local contexts that our education systems are situated within. The other one that we'll talk about a bit later is emotional intelligence. So these intelligences, contextual intelligence, emotional intelligence, will become the superpowers for leaders of education moving forwards. As Natalie said, context matters. And one of the reasons I was drawn to Microsoft from the world of education was our mission to empower every learner on the planet to achieve more. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that every. And by every, we mean regardless of ability, disability, mobility, identity, income, location. So when we design tools and when we design solutions for education, we create those keeping in mind that they need to empower every learner to achieve their full potential.
That's great. I think that one of the challenges that I see my friends in the US facing as education leaders of school systems is getting kids back engaged in learning in school. That challenge of open and shutting has just caused a disengagement, or parents are still keeping their kids at home, or kids are just having a hard time plugging in. And one of the reasons why I joined Microsoft is because of some of the amazing engagement that they had created with Minecraft EDU or Flipgrid, and watching how teachers use those types of tools to really get kids back into the classroom and learning. Natalie, I know that you've spent a lot of your time also researching student engagement. What does the research talk about relative to engagement in this region? And how are you helping inform government practice around that?
Yeah, so we've been tracking the impact of the pandemic and lockdown on pupils' reading and maths. And what's interesting is when you look back at the 2021 term, children came back post that first period of lockdown in the autumn, and they were considerably further behind. And then while in school they started to catch up, then we had another period of lockdown, they fell behind again. And then when they went back to school, by the end of the summer term, there was considerable catch-up, which was great, but not equitable. So we still found that disadvantaged pupils in certain parts of England were still much further behind than their peers. So, going back to school, having access to technology has helped, but there are still, really important gaps that government needs to address.
Mark, I know that you've spent a lot of the pandemic helping schools think about how to leverage technology to get back in schools. Can you speak to a little bit about your experience relative to getting students re-engaged in learning?
Yeah, absolutely. Empowerment, engagement, and equity all begin with inclusion. So that would be my first comment that I would make. A great special education teacher quite close to Microsoft's headquarters in Washington State, Redmond, she said to me, Robin Lowell is her name, special education teacher. She said, students would sooner miss out than stand out. So for her, the kinds of tools and features in products that provide non-stigmatizing help, that allow students to control the support that they need, drives engagement, because students feel that they're capable, it makes them confident, they feel more connected to their work. Tools like Immersive Reader, which is available free, and it's used by 23 million people at the moment across the globe. It's a Microsoft feature across many of our products. It's in Minecraft. It sits inside of Office. A tool like Immersive Reader was built intentionally for students experiencing dyslexia. It reads aloud, it breaks words into syllables, it identifies word components, it removes visual clutter, it provides a focus view, it translates into 60+ languages, and has a built-in picture dictionary, all for free. So for a student who's experiencing a temporary, a permanent, or even a situational difficulty with learning to read, tools like that mean that they're included, which means they're engaged.
Yeah, I think dyslexia is a great place in the region where policy and practice are coming together. Right now, there is a movement to ask all teachers to assess for dyslexia within students and to give teachers training to support identification and support of learners. And this is a place where I think technology can be a great help.
Yeah, that's a really good example of both where Natalie's expertise in policy and practice come together, because policy alone can only go so far. It needs to be translated into practice, and often that's through professional learning. So Microsoft has partnered with Made by Dyslexia and has co-developed a series of courses to help train every educator on the planet to become skilled up, not only in identifying dyslexia, but recognizing it as also a superpower that can be harnessed and harvested.
It's great. I think the last topic I want to talk about today, which you brought up in the beginning, is really thinking about how to make sure that kids are ready to learn. And a lot of that has to do with their well-being. And as you mentioned, a lot of kids' well-being has been disrupted by loss across the pandemic. And this is a place where I think technology can help make school leaders and teachers more efficient and effective in identifying and supporting children. So I know you've done a lot of research around child well-being and learning and school success. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen?
Yeah, so again, it's important to go back to what things looked like before the pandemic. And we already saw increasing rates in children and young people with mental health issues. And we also saw that actually they were struggling to access services they need. And in turn, that was putting pressure on schools who had to kind of plug the gap of specialist services. And then we've only seen those rates of mental ill health increase over the course of the pandemic, from about 1 in 9 pupils to about 1 in 6. And interestingly, eating disorders has had a really big rise within that. So I think, you know, there is an important role for schools and school leaders in tackling young people's mental health and helping to support their well-being. But again, this is all linked because, you know, young people, they need to be living out of poverty in a stable and secure home environment. So we can't just put the responsibility on schools alone.
That's right. This is a team sport helping support student well-being. Mark, speaking of team sports, talk a little bit about how you've seen technology support student well-being in schools.
Yeah. I guess my first comment would be that emotion is data. Emotion is information that tells us something as teachers and leaders that we need to pay attention to. The other comment would be that when we think about the previous discussion on engagement, emotions are literally the gatekeeper of motivation, attention, and cognition. Why we do what we do, how we process and view the world, and also how that affects our behaviours. When we think about technology, the promise that technology provides is to help students to develop an emotional vocabulary. So Microsoft has a tool in Teams called Reflect. It helps students to develop emotional granularity. That's the ability to recognize, understand, label, and express emotions. Tools like Minecraft Education Edition, we built an intentional world, a medieval quest for mindfulness called Mindful Night. And it intentionally teaches students how to practice mindfulness, to pause, reflect, consider their emotional state and how that's impacting. The really cool thing is that all of that data, that emotional data from Reflect, finds its way back into a dashboard for teachers and leaders alongside the information about student achievement, attendance, participation and engagement. Now you've got a heartbeat of how I feel running along the top, self-reported. That's powerful information for teachers and leaders.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I would also say, having talked to several educators that use it, the Reflect tool, they also use it to help kids metacognate on how they're feeling. That a lot of times if you identify stress, it helps alleviate stress. One of the most fascinating things about the Reflect tool, if you see it in Teams, it has these little feeling monsters, which to me almost look like Sesame Street monsters or something like that. So I would expect them to be used in elementary school or maybe, secondary schools. What's shocking to me is how many higher education institutions are also using this tool for student well-being. The truth is that all levels of education, if you're not ready to learn, if you're not feeling centered in yourself and safe, you're not going to be ready to learn. And so I just think it's a great example of something that's free. It's embedded in what educators, faculty are already using, and it's something that helps save you time and makes you more efficient, but also makes you more effective. And I really, that actually is the hope that I have in the current moment in time. Not that governments are going to be ready to save the day with amazing policies and tons more funding, but rather that educators and students are going to leverage the tools that are there and find amazing innovations. And that's what makes me excited to have all you here today, because I know because you're spending your time at Bett, it means you're dedicated to professional development, that you're really trying to lean into practice that supports your kids. And so I hope that at Bett you learn a lot that you can take with you back to help all the kids in your classroom. Natalie, what sort of brings you inspiration or hope? I know that you work in a lot of dire documents and research right now, but talk a little bit about where you're thinking about moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. As you talked about, Paige, I don't think we can expect to see anything transformational or game-changing from this government we have right now. So it really is down to school leaders and teachers and everyone working with young people to, lean on the evidence, because there is so much out there from, early intervention through to well-being programs, improving teacher quality and development, and then running after-school extracurricular activities to try and compensate for not just some of the lost learning we've seen, but actually the lost socialization and sporting activities, for example. So in summary, schools and everyone working with young people, I think, have the potential to step up.
I totally agree. I mean, don't discount the importance of sports for physical well-being, learning teaming, all the things that the new collar economy is going to demand. Mark, how about you? What brings you inspiration as we bring this session to a close?
Certainly visiting schools. So I was out visiting schools yesterday, and I was listening to the way that they were reframing the experiences over the last couple of years from why did this happen to me to what is this teaching me? Shifting from a fixed to a growth mindset. That's inspiring. I think the last 2 years have taught us a couple of things. One is the future is very, very hard to predict. That's been proved to us. But the teachers and the schools that I visit that are focused on accelerating learning for everyone, not just remediation, but helping kids to catch up, keep up, get ahead, and still remain focused on developing skills for the future. Those schools that are equally focused on well-being and designing for inclusion of all, they're the schools and the classrooms that inspire me, and they also give me hope that as we move forwards, we'll be taking the best forwards that what we've learned over the last couple of years.
That's great. I think that what inspires me as you walk around this floor is to go to places, booths of products that you already have, and ask what they have that's new. What I think you will find is that a lot of companies are investing in exactly these concepts. How to make their curriculum, content, and offerings more relevant, how to support kids who might be learning in a second language, how to support emotional intelligence, well-being, how to make you more efficient as an educator. Ask for the product developers that you use to support you in this. I think that this is just a mandate for all companies that are working in this area. And I know that it's something that at Microsoft we're very committed to make sure that our technologies are inclusive, accessible, supportive, and often free or built in to our products. And so we hope you'll join us at our booth and in our other offerings. I'd like to thank Natalie and Mark for joining me today in this really critical conversation on supporting all kids in moving forward into what's next. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.